My name is Emily Carter. I am 34 years old, and my family believes I dispatch freight at night for barely enough money to cover rent. They have no idea I own Crestline Distribution Group, a $2.7 billion logistics empire. I kept it private because every achievement I ever earned somehow became my brother's spotlight or my parents' property. On Christmas Eve, they invited me over to celebrate my brother's new CEO position and his $324,000 salary, but the invitation asked me to arrive early. I knew dinner wasn't the only thing they had planned. I wore a coat, carried my work bag, and drove my 10-year-old car because I wanted to see exactly how they treated the woman they believed was broke. The moment I walked through the door, every jaw was about to drop, but not for the reason they expected. Before I tell you what was waiting beside my plate, let me know where you're watching from and what kind of evening you're having. My mother inspected my coat, warned me not to embarrass the guests, then quickly covered a stack of job applications. "We'll talk about your future after dinner," she said. 10 minutes later, every seat at the table was filled, and the celebration began as though I'd been invited only to provide a comparison. My older brother, Ryan Carter, sat beneath a gold banner that read, "Congratulations, CEO." He wore a brand new watch and proudly announced that Meridian Medical Supply had appointed him Chief Executive Officer with a salary of $324,000 a year. My mother, Susan Carter, repeated the number as though it deserved another round of applause. My father, Richard Carter, raised his glass and declared that the family finally had a leader with the discipline to carry the Carter name forward. Ryan added that Meridian had leased him a company SUV and that he and his wife were already looking at a house in Wauwatosa once his first bonus arrived. Before dessert, Ryan passed his phone around the table so everyone could admire the leased SUV and the online listing for the house. Susan praised the stone entryway. Richard said executives needed homes that projected credibility. When the phone reached me, Ryan smiled. "Don't worry, Emily. We're going to help you become presentable too." His wife, Megan Carter, sat beside him in a cream-colored suit, accepting every compliment as though she'd personally negotiated his promotion. She was Meridian's chief financial officer, and my parents treated their marriage as proof that Ryan had made all the right choices in life. "A CEO and a CFO at the same table," Susan said. "That's what ambition looks like." Then she asked whether my freight terminal still gave employees discounts on vending machine food. My aunt, Linda Foster, wanted to know my hourly wage. Her husband, David Foster, asked whether freight dispatching required any real training or whether people simply answered phones until a truck showed up. I explained that the job required judgment, timing, and a deep understanding of transportation routes. David laughed. "That's a very sophisticated way of describing someone who wears a headset." Linda asked how much I paid for my apartment, whether I had health insurance, and if my landlord had finally fixed the heat. They never waited for complete answers. Every question simply reinforced a conclusion they'd already reached. I told them I was doing fine. Richard immediately compared my life to Ryan's. "Your brother understands that careers are built by taking responsibility," he said. "You keep choosing jobs that let you disappear." I could have told him that my decisions affected freight moving through 22 states, that hospitals depended on our refrigerated transportation network, and that more than 14,000 employees received paychecks from the company I founded. Instead, I asked Ryan what Meridian planned to do next. He announced that Crestline Distribution Group had invited Meridian to a final presentation on December 26th. Meridian wanted a multi-year distribution agreement covering medical supplies for regional hospitals, and Ryan claimed Crestline had approached him because his reputation had reached the company's board. I knew the truth. Meridian had requested that meeting 5 separate times. Crestline agreed only because several hospital clients wanted a secondary supplier in case of shortages. Ryan had been given one carefully controlled opportunity to prove that Meridian was financially and operationally stable. Megan's fingers tightened around her fork the moment he mentioned Crestline. She described Meridian's inventory controls as some of the strongest in the industry, but every time someone asked a detailed question about the review process, she glanced toward Ryan before answering. Richard said Crestline's anonymous founder was exactly the kind of person young executives should study. Disciplined, ethical, self-made, strategic. Susan nodded. The founder never gives interviews because serious people don't need attention. Ryan smiled confidently before explaining that his leadership had probably impressed someone at Crestline. Megan looked at me. Do you even understand what a contract that size could mean? It could transform Meridian, I replied. Only if the numbers are real. Her expression immediately hardened. Ryan interrupted and explained that Crestline's headquarters occupied a renovated rail terminal in St. Paul. Since I supposedly worked around freight facilities, he wanted me to guide the family from the parking lot to the reception desk. Susan had already decided that everyone should attend because Ryan's success belonged to the entire family. I agreed. I wanted to hear exactly what Ryan planned to say inside my boardroom. Later, while I carried dishes into the kitchen, I overheard Susan talking with Linda near the pantry. She explained that every family member had been assigned a topic for the conversation after dessert: employment, housing, retirement, relationships, personal responsibility. Linda asked whether Ryan's solution was ready. Susan smiled. The assistant contract is already printed. Emily will sign it tonight, and then she can finally learn how a real company operates. After dinner, my mother guided everyone into the living room. The chairs had already been arranged in a semicircle facing the couch, making it obvious that this discussion had been planned long before the invitation was mailed. Susan seated me in the center and took her place beside Richard with a folder resting across her knees. Ryan and Megan settled into the armchairs. Linda and David sat near the fireplace while my grandmother, Evelyn Carter, remained quietly at the edge of the room, both hands resting on her cane. Susan smiled politely. Nobody wants you to feel attacked. This is an intervention because we care about you. She looked directly at me. We love you too much to watch you waste another year. Richard opened a financial planning folder filled with a sample budget, a debt worksheet, and a page titled Adult Accountability Agreement. He had estimated my income, rent, grocery expenses, and transportation costs without ever asking to see a bank statement. Every number was wrong. What revealed the most wasn't the mistakes. It was how certain he was. He concluded that I had no retirement plan, no property, no meaningful professional network, and no realistic path to long-term financial security. Linda slid another packet onto the coffee table. Inside were apartment listings near my parents' neighborhood, resume templates, and applications for office coordinator positions. Several forms already had my name typed across the top. These are respectable jobs, she said. You can stop pretending freight dispatching is a career. David suggested I sell my car before it became a financial burden. He even offered to list it online, saying I might get enough money for a bus pass and a small emergency fund. Not one person asked whether my car was reliable, whether I liked my apartment, or whether I already had investments. They weren't trying to understand my life. They had already decided what it was. They weren't offering me a future. They were assigning me one. Linda asked whether I'd ever been in a serious relationship, suggesting that loneliness explained my lack of direction. Susan added relationships to the family's monitoring plan and proposed weekly family dinners. I stayed silent, but the contract was beginning to look less like an employment offer and more like legal permission to control my life. Ryan placed a black folder in front of me. Inside was an employment contract from Meridian Medical Supply. My name, proposed start date, and salary had already been filled in. According to the agreement, I would resign from the freight terminal and become Ryan's executive assistant for $42,000 a year. My responsibilities included managing his calendar, arranging travel, scheduling personal appointments, coordinating family events, and completing any additional duties assigned at the CEO's discretion. "This is your way out," he said. "You'll finally see how a serious company operates." I asked whether he'd considered what I wanted. Richard answered instead. "Your choices haven't earned this family's confidence. When someone offers you structure, gratitude is the appropriate response." Ryan said he needed the contract signed before the Crestline meeting because arriving with a new executive assistant would make his office appear more established. I asked why the position also included family errands. Susan smiled. "Successful families support each other." Megan cleared her throat and rested one hand on her stomach. Then she announced she was pregnant. Susan burst into tears. Richard embraced Ryan, and Linda immediately started discussing baby names before Megan had even finished speaking. I congratulated them because the baby had nothing to do with the adult's behavior. Within minutes, my mother steered the conversation back to the contract. She explained that I could move into Ryan and Megan's guest room, help after the baby was born, and save money while the family monitored my spending. Megan pretended to hesitate. "Emily should have her own life," she said, "but her schedule isn't very demanding, and having someone familiar around would certainly help." The arrangement would make me subordinate to Ryan at work and unpaid help at home. David joked that changing diapers might finally teach me responsibility. Evelyn looked from me to Susan but remained silent. Ryan slid a pen across the table. "Sign it tonight. I can't walk into Crestline with an assistant who looks indecisive." I picked up the contract and noticed another document underneath it. The heading contained my late grandfather's name and the words, "Carter Family Trust." Before I could read any further, Susan pulled it away and slipped it beneath Richard's folder. "That's unrelated." I asked why a trust document had been placed beneath my employment contract. Richard told me not to create distractions. I set the pen down and said I'd review the offer for one day. Ryan's expression hardened. People without options shouldn't negotiate as though they have leverage. Megan's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind her. When I went to get my coat, I heard her say, "Change the inventory reserve. The lender can't see the original warehouse valuation, and those numbers have to be corrected before Crestline conducts its review." The call ended. The door opened. Megan found me standing close enough to have heard everything. A few minutes later, she followed me onto the back porch and quietly closed the door behind us. She asked how much of the conversation I'd heard. "I heard enough to recognize that you're changing financial information before a due diligence review." Her smile returned, but this time it looked carefully controlled. "You work in dispatch," she said. "Inventory reserves and collateral valuations are more complicated than they sound." I asked why something so routine required hiding the original warehouse valuation from a lender. For the first time that evening, she stopped speaking to me like I was a child. She explained that companies adjusted estimates all the time, and that people without finance experience often misunderstood routine corrections. Then she offered to help me find a better position at Meridian if I continued supporting Ryan and didn't create problems before the Crestline meeting. I asked whether the better position also included changing diapers. Her jaw tightened. "Don't create problems for your brother just because you're embarrassed by your own life." I didn't threaten her or reveal what I knew. I simply replied, "Then your records should be able to explain themselves." Megan went back inside first. When I returned, Evelyn was standing near the hallway with her coat already buttoned. She quietly asked whether I could help her find a box in the garage. Susan barely looked up, assuming my grandmother simply needed someone to carry it. Once we were alone in the garage, Evelyn opened her purse and placed a brass key into my hand. It belonged to a safe deposit box at a bank near downtown St. Paul. "Your grandfather left something for you," she said. I asked why she'd waited until now. She admitted she'd spent years hoping my parents would correct what they'd done without forcing the family into court. My grandfather had left me a minority ownership interest in a commercial property beside the old St. Paul rail terminal. At the time, it had been little more than neglected land, with storage buildings and cracked pavement. As logistics companies expanded throughout the district, the property became extremely valuable. Evelyn explained that Susan and Richard later claimed I had signed a disclaimer transferring my interest to a Carter family holding company. She had seen the signature and never believed it was mine. I asked what the holding company had done with the property. It had pledged the parcel as collateral for a Meridian expansion loan that helped Ryan's division grow and strengthened his path to becoming CEO. Your father said you agreed because Ryan had a future and you didn't. Evelyn looked at me with tears in her eyes. They turned that judgment into a financial decision and used your inheritance to support the child they believed was worthy. She explained that the safe deposit box contained trust records and correspondence my grandfather's attorney had sent before his death. She apologized for staying silent for so many years. I told her I'd decide what the documents meant after I'd read them. I didn't tell her that Crestline already owned most of the surrounding rail terminal property, or that the disputed parcel sat directly inside a redevelopment project our board had postponed because of unresolved title issues. As I left, Susan called after me that the assistant position would expire the following day. Ryan reminded me to meet the family at Crestline on December 26th. I drove to the modest apartment I kept for private visits and opened my secure laptop. A message was waiting in Crestline's whistleblower portal. It came from Megan Fletcher, Meridian's internal audit manager. She reported inflated warehouse assets, duplicate vendor payments, inventory recorded at facilities where it didn't exist, and pressure from Megan to alter financial reports. Megan Fletcher had preserved emails, board materials, and revision histories. Her report also stated that Ryan had received at least one warning and instructed her to postpone raising the issue until after his promotion to CEO. I called Rachel Sloan, Crestline's chief operating officer, and summarized both the phone call I'd overheard and the evidence Megan Fletcher had submitted. Rachel asked whether I wanted to cancel Meridian's presentation. No, I said. Let them make every representation on the record. She agreed to begin an independent review, preserve every submitted file, and arrange for outside counsel, board members, and Meridian's lender to observe the presentation remotely. On Christmas morning, I used Evelyn's key to open the safe deposit box. Inside were the original trust documents, a copy of the alleged disclaimer, and letters exchanged between Richard and the family's attorney. The disclaimer had been notarized on a date when I was attending college in Oregon. My college transcripts, dorm records, and campus employment schedule proved I had been more than 1,500 miles away. I photographed every page, sealed the originals back inside their envelope, and immediately sent encrypted copies to Rachel and Crestline's outside counsel that morning. One letter warned that the signature might not survive forensic examination. Another, written by Richard, stated that the transfer should remain unquestioned because Meridian needed the collateral. The final sentence had been underlined twice. Meridian's lender must never learn that Emily Carter still holds a legal claim to the property. By sunrise on December 26th, the roads were clear. I dressed in a navy suit, pinned back my hair, and pulled the same old coat over everything before leaving. Crestline's St. Paul headquarters occupied a renovated rail terminal with a public reception desk, a loading control center, an operations floor, and an executive conference level above the original platforms. Nothing about it was secret. Trucks entered through clearly marked gates. Employees crossed the lobby wearing company badges, and visitors checked in beneath a directory displaying the Crestline name. I arrived before 7 and met Rachel in the main boardroom. She told me Crestline's independent directors, outside counsel, and a representative from Meridian's lender would all attend through a secure video connection. Megan Fletcher had agreed to appear from a protected location. Our review team had already compared Meridian's presentation files with earlier submissions and preserved every revision. I gave one instruction. No one would reveal the discrepancies until Ryan and Megan finished making their claims. They would be allowed to describe Meridian's inventory, collateral, and internal controls without interruption. Every statement would be recorded. At 8:30, the Carter family walked into the lobby together. Susan had insisted they attend because Ryan's strong family values would impress Crestline. Ryan wore a dark overcoat and carried a leather presentation case. Megan walked beside him with a laptop bag and a carefully controlled expression. Richard, Susan, Linda, and David followed behind them as though they were attending an awards ceremony. They found me waiting near the reception desk in my old coat. Ryan looked relieved. "Good. You made it." He handed me the leather case. "Carry this upstairs and stay close in case I need anything." I accepted it because I wanted the moment documented exactly as it happened. Megan leaned toward me. "Don't speak during the meeting unless someone asks you a direct question. This isn't the place to pretend you understand business." Susan added that I wasn't to mention the intervention, my job problems, or my hesitation about Ryan's offer. "Today is about him," she said. The receptionist, who knew me well, looked from my family to me. "Is the executive level ready for you, Miss Carter?" "I'll join them shortly," I replied. Ryan interpreted the exchange as nothing more than routine courtesy. "Crestline trains even its front desk employees to be unusually formal," he explained. We passed the loading control center, where enormous live screens tracked refrigerated shipments moving across the Midwest. David quietly admitted that the operation looked far more complicated than my freight terminal. I said nothing. Inside the elevator, Ryan rehearsed his opening remarks, while Susan straightened his tie. Richard reminded Megan to emphasize the collateral package. She answered a little too quickly that the title was clean. Linda asked whether employees like me were normally allowed above the operations floor. Ryan smiled. "Crestline is making an exception because she's part of my support team today." On the conference level, Rachel welcomed Meridian's delegation and directed the family to their seats. I remained quietly along the side wall, while Ryan stepped to the front of the room. He introduced himself as Meridian's new chief executive officer and described the company as financially stable, operationally disciplined, and fully prepared for a long-term partnership. He claimed Meridian's current inventory could support Crestline's hospital network without interruption. He stated that Meridian's collateral was free of challenges, its warehouse valuations were conservative, and its internal controls had been independently tested. Megan confirmed that every number in the presentation was complete and accurate. She explained that recent adjustments reflected routine accounting updates rather than changes in the company's actual condition. Rachel asked whether any lender, auditor, or internal employee had raised unresolved concerns regarding inventory or vendor payments. Megan answered no. Ryan added that he had personally corrected management weaknesses inherited from the previous administration. He claimed his promotion proved Meridian's board trusted his judgment. Richard then asked permission to speak on behalf of the Carter family holding company. He described the St. Paul property supporting Meridian's expansion as properly transferred, fully controlled, and free of competing claims. Susan assured everyone watching that Ryan had always been honest, focused, and responsible. Linda said the family had watched him earn every success. David called him the safest executive in the room. I noticed the lender's representative quietly taking notes. Ryan continued. He claimed Crestline had approached Meridian because its anonymous founder recognized exceptional leadership. He promised that, under his direction, Meridian would become Crestline's most reliable medical supply partner. When the presentation ended, Rachel asked a final question. Have Meridian and its representatives now completed all material statements concerning inventory, internal controls, collateral, and executive knowledge? Megan looked at Ryan. Ryan answered confidently. Yes. Everything relevant has been disclosed. Rachel turned toward me. Ms. Carter, would you please take your seat at the head of the table? I crossed the room and placed Ryan's presentation case beside the chair. He stepped in front of me and let out a nervous laugh. Emily, she means someone from Crestline. Go ahead and sit back down. Security remained by the doorway without moving. Every officer in the building already knew exactly who I was. Rachel touched the control panel. The main screen changed. Crestline Distribution Group Office of the Founder. Beneath the heading appeared my name and title. Emily Carter, founder and majority owner Rachel, faced Meridian's delegation. For the record, she said, I am introducing Crestline's founder and controlling shareholder. Ryan remained frozen with one hand still extended toward the chair that belonged to me. No one spoke. I sat down and placed Ryan's unsigned executive assistant contract beside his presentation folder. His hand slowly fell to his side. Susan stared at the screen, then back at my old coat, as though one of them had to be a lie. Richard removed his glasses and wiped lenses that weren't dirty. Linda quietly whispered my name. David glanced toward the exit. Megan didn't move. I opened the contract to the page listing my salary and responsibilities. 40 hours ago, I said, this family tried to hire Crestline's founder as Ryan's executive assistant for $42,000 a year. Susan found her voice first. She insisted the intervention had been motivated by love and that they could only act on the information I'd given them. I asked a single question. Would any of this have been acceptable if I really had been a struggling freight dispatcher? No one answered. Ryan accused me of deceiving the family for years. I told him I'd kept private information private. They had invented everything else without ever asking me. They decided I was irresponsible, uninsured, lonely, and incapable. They created employment contracts, housing rules, spending restrictions, and unpaid childcare responsibilities based entirely on those assumptions. You didn't need my financial statements to treat me with basic respect, I said. Megan interrupted, insisting that family matters had nothing to do with Meridian's proposal. Then let's discuss Meridian, I replied. Rachel displayed a comparison of the financial files Meridian had submitted over the previous 6 weeks. Megan Fletcher appeared by secure video and identified herself as Meridian's internal audit manager. She explained that several inventory entries represented products that did not exist in the listed warehouses. Some serial number groups appeared in 2 different locations simultaneously. Vendor contracts had been revised after approval, and duplicate payments had been routed through North River Advisory, a consulting company owned by Megan's cousin. Megan called Megan Fletcher a disgruntled employee who misunderstood executive accounting adjustments. Rachel immediately displayed the original emails, approval logs, and complete document revision history. One email from Megan instructed the accounting department to maintain the inflated inventory figures until after Crestline signed the agreement. Another directed a controller to classify consulting payments as emergency procurement support. Megan Fletcher then displayed the warning she had previously sent Ryan. It described unsupported inventory, related party payments, and the risk that Meridian's collateral package included property the company might not legally control. Ryan admitted he had received the warning, but he insisted Megan had assured him the problems were merely technical. A board packet appeared on the screen. Its agenda history showed that Ryan had ordered Megan Fletcher's report removed from a meeting 2 days before his appointment as CEO. His written explanation stated that discussing the report could create unnecessary instability during the leadership transition. I looked at him. You may not have designed the scheme, but you knowingly prevented scrutiny because scrutiny threatened the title you wanted. Ryan turned toward Megan. Why did you tell me the report was routine? She met his eyes. You wanted the promotion. You made your own decision. Richard stood. He insisted the allegations about the property were baseless. I removed the original trust documents from a sealed evidence envelope and placed them before outside counsel. The next screen displayed the disputed disclaimer, the notarization date, my college records from Oregon, and Richard's correspondence with the family attorney. The representative from Meridian's lender asked Richard whether he had written that Meridian must never learn I still held a legal claim to the property. Richard claimed his words had been taken out of context. Evelyn, appearing remotely with her attorney, confirmed that my grandfather had intended the ownership interest for me and that she had never believed I signed it away. Susan began crying. She admitted they believed Ryan needed the land more because he had ambition, a family, and a corporate future. "Emily, you were drifting," she said. "We thought the property would be wasted." I asked a single question. Does theft become responsible planning simply because parents prefer one child over another? She said they had only been trying to protect the family. The lender's representative announced that the bank's legal and fraud teams would immediately begin reviewing the collateral documents. Crestline's outside counsel instructed Meridian's representatives to preserve all devices, messages, and business records. Rachel formally announced that Crestline was rejecting Meridian's proposal. On one of the remote video screens, Meridian's independent directors immediately convened an emergency session. They placed Ryan on administrative leave, pending investigation, and revoked Megan's access to the company's financial systems. Megan argued that the board was overreacting and claimed Megan Fletcher had manipulated incomplete files. The directors ordered Meridian's technology department to preserve every version of every document. Ryan accused Megan of using him. She fired back that he had signed every executive certification himself and had personally suppressed the internal warning. Ryan turned toward Richard and Susan. "You spent my entire life teaching me that this family would erase every consequence as long as I stayed successful." Susan pleaded with me. "Please stop this. We can handle it privately." I shook my head. Employees' jobs, lender funds, and hospital supply contracts are involved. This stopped being a private family matter the moment false records were used outside your home. Richard asked whether Crestline would save Meridian for Ryan's sake. I answered calmly. Crestline will provide temporary supply support directly to Meridian's hospital customers, so patients and employees aren't punished for executive misconduct. But Crestline will not rescue Meridian's owners, officers, or family investors. Susan tried to apologize. I stopped her. "This isn't family counseling." I paused. "This is a due diligence record." I handed Richard formal notice that my attorneys would challenge the property transfer and seek court orders preventing any further sale, transfer, or use of the property as collateral. Ryan finally sat down. He looked exhausted. "Did you plan this humiliation from Christmas Eve?" "I planned a business review," I answered. "You and the family created the humiliation yourselves." For the first time, Ryan looked less angry with me than frightened of the person sitting beside him. Rachel received another encrypted file from Megan Fletcher. She opened it immediately. The screen displayed an email Megan had written to her cousin that had never been released. In it, she explained that once Crestline signed the agreement, she intended to blame every financial irregularity on Ryan, resign immediately, and leave him responsible for all the executive certifications. The consequences began before my family even reached the parking lot. Meridian's board completed an emergency vote and terminated Megan for cause. The company disabled her system access, retained outside investigators, notified its insurer and lenders, and filed a civil action seeking recovery of unauthorized payments. Investigators also began reviewing whether altered financial records or false collateral documents had been submitted to financial institutions. No one in that room could predict what criminal authorities might eventually decide. I wasn't about to pretend a business presentation was a courtroom. Ryan remained on administrative leave while Meridian completed its investigation. 3 weeks later, the board removed him as chief executive officer after concluding that he had suppressed internal warnings, misrepresented due diligence, and failed to supervise the chief financial officer. Under the terms of his employment agreement, Meridian revoked his compensation package, canceled his performance award, and reclaimed the leased company vehicle. He and Megan eventually separated. Their unborn child was never part of my response. The pregnancy didn't excuse their choices, and it didn't deserve to become another weapon. Meridian continued operating under interim leadership while Crestline contracted directly with hospitals to prevent interruptions in medical supply deliveries. The employees who had worked honestly continued serving customers. Crestline also funded counseling and career placement assistance for Meridian employees facing uncertainty. Megan Fletcher received legal protection under Meridian's whistleblower policy and later accepted a promotion to Director of Internal Controls. Her evidence helped the company separate operational mistakes from deliberate misconduct. I filed a civil lawsuit challenging the transfer of the property. The court temporarily prohibited the parcel from being sold, pledged, or altered while ownership was determined. A forensic document examiner concluded that the signature on the disclaimer wasn't mine. Faced with the original trust documents, travel records, attorney correspondence, and handwriting analysis, Susan and Richard agreed to restore the title, reimburse my legal expenses, and surrender every claim rather than continue the case. Their bank and professional contacts learned about the disputed collateral through mandatory legal notices and lender reviews. I never published private records. I never started an online revenge campaign. The legal record spoke for itself. Linda eventually sent me an apology that ended by asking whether I could help refinance her home. David wrote that families shouldn't keep score and wondered whether Crestline had a management position available for him. I never responded to either message. Ryan came to Crestline without an appointment 2 months after his removal. Security called my office and I agreed to meet him in a conference room near the lobby. He looked thinner. The expensive watch he had proudly displayed on Christmas Eve was gone. He told me the family was finally ready to acknowledge everything I'd accomplished. Then he asked me to invest in Meridian, protect the value of his remaining shares, and help him keep the Wauwatosa house he had purchased before the investigation. I looked at him. They don't miss me. I let the silence settle. They miss the version of me they believed they could control. Learning that I was wealthy hadn't erased the choices they made when they believed I had nothing. "You're asking me to restore your lifestyle," I said, "not your conscience." Ryan argued that I'd tested the family by hiding my identity. I answered quietly, "Respect that appears only after someone learns your value isn't respect." I handed him a letter from my attorneys requiring that all future communication regarding the property, Meridian, or financial matters go through legal counsel. He left without another word. Susan later mailed me a box of family photographs and asked whether we could spend another Christmas together. I returned the box unopened. Evelyn remained the only relative with whom I maintained limited contact because she had provided evidence without demanding forgiveness in return. I didn't ignore the years she remained silent, but I understood the difference between delayed honesty and a strategic apology. Several months later, after ownership of the property had been restored, I transferred the land into a workforce development foundation. We built paid training programs in logistics, refrigeration maintenance, freight dispatching, warehouse technology, and supply chain safety. I chose that purpose because my family had mocked the working people whose skills helped me build Crestline. At the opening ceremony, I spoke about skilled work, opportunity, and dignity. I never mentioned my family. I never celebrated their losses. Cutting contact wasn't an impulsive act of revenge. It was the final boundary after years of emotional and financial exploitation. My family believed money was the reason they should respect me. They were wrong. The moment that truly mattered wasn't when they discovered what I owned. It was the moment I realized I didn't owe access to people who valued me only after discovering my worth. Their apologies came only after their power disappeared, and I was no longer willing to mistake regret for real change. I didn't walk away because I had become powerful. I walked away because I had finally stopped giving my power away. Thank you for listening and staying with me until the end. All events and characters in this story are entirely fictional and created for entertainment and reflection. I hope this story reminds you that the people who hurt you may expect you to remain invisible, endlessly forgiving, and always available. But once you recognize your own worth, access to your life becomes something that must be earned through genuine respect